Yes, the Ethno, the museum they were going to. There's a lot to say about that. Let's see if I can be brief. The real name is the Museum of the North, the North Virginia Museum of Ethnology, but nobody said that. They just called it the Ethno, short for ethnology. But it had been almost 20 years in the making, and it was finally going to open. And Violet had a role in this, and much more so her son, Yeoman. That would be Elaine's uncle Yo, is what she called him. His buddies called him Yo. Anyway, how that happened was that back when Yeoman was in 10th grade, he had a chance to go to Europe. That was the first time he went, other times later. And the tour he was going on was called London, Madrid, and Lisbon. And they were going in each one of those cities. Well, before he went on the trip, Violet asked him if there's one thing she wanted him to do, please. When he got to Lisbon, she wanted him to see if he could find out where a certain collection of artifacts had gotten to that had been in a museum called the Museum of Popular Art. I think it was the really old name for the museum, but that was sort of still there, but she knew the collection wasn't there. She had seen it when she was traveling with Wedge many, many years ago, at that time probably 30 years before, but she'd never forgotten it. And she wanted to know where it was. So anyway, obediently, Yeoman, when he got to Lisbon, when he had time of his own, he did some researching. Now, he was good in Spanish. He knew Spanish, but he didn't know Portuguese. But he still managed to find out that stuff was located in the new National Museum of Ethnology in Lisbon. So he'd done his job, he'd found that out, and he'd even gotten to see it. And that really took some doing. But he was able to get there, and he was able to see that collection, and it impressed him. Well, when he got home, the next fall, he started, this was 11th grade now, he started to study CAD, Computer Assisted Drafting, I think is what that stands for. I don't even know if they call it the same thing now, because technology's changed so much. But he was studying it, and he was really good at it. It could well have been his grandfather, whom he never had met. His grandfather had died long before he was born, but maybe it was in the genes to be an architect. He didn't know. But he was really good at it, and the stuff that they did was just rinky-dink. So he decided, of the two things that he's seen on that Europe trip, the two things that impressed him most, believe it or not, in all of London, was Westminster Hall and the hammer beam trusses in the roof of Westminster Hall, even more than the Gothic cathedrals that say Westminster Abbey. He had loved that. And then the other was that collection that he'd seen at the Ethnology Museum. So he thought, now he's just a 11th grader, he thought, why don't I put the two together? I think that Richland should have a museum of ethnology, and I think it ought to have a building with a roof like that. Well, how that could be done? See, he thought, I'll design it. I'll make it out of steel, and he had this whole plan. He got buddies of his enthused about it too. He thought he could do it. He had one good friend whose dad had a scrap yard, a salvage yard. He could get the steel. They could use part of a parking lot because there weren't as many cars being used anyway, and he saw the future was not going to be cars. So there was a parking lot. All he really needed was, it didn't have to be the same size, but it could still give the same effect. And all he really needed was 8 really big anchor spots. He could do that. He could fire up his kids to do it. No heating, No air conditioning. That wasn't needed. You didn't even really need walls. They could just kind of lace. They'd make it look nice, of course, but they could lace fabric among it or leave it open. Yeah, he was really excited about the idea. They even made a model, but it went nowhere because back at that time, you had to have permits for everything. You had to use new material to sign off on the structural integrity. He ran into all that stuff that made the work of an artist like he was then impossible. And he got so disgusted actually with that. It might have been one of the reasons that he didn't settle in Richland, North Virginia after he finished college, but rather went to Brooklyn. That's where he settled. But about 5 years earlier, there had been a new generation of young kids, and they got wind of what had been attempted, and they threw themselves into it. And now the climate had changed, and they had pulled it off. His friend now owned and operated that scrapyard, and they managed to come up with the money. And in spite of how hard Tatus fought against this, because for Tatus this was never, that's not the way it was done, but they had beat it, and they had managed to build it actually, and there it was waiting to open, the Ethno.